New court filings in a lawsuit against Capital One allege that the bank basically went out of its way to scam their own customers out of a whopping $2 billion. Now, this scheme involves high interest savings accounts, which I hope all of you took advantage of while interest rates were high. I know that there are now cuts to the rate, but you can find back in the day, at least last year, you could find a nice savings account with a 5%, 5.5% interest rate, have your money make money for you. Well, this lawsuit has to do with those high interest rate savings accounts that were offered by Capital One. Now, this lawsuit, which was filed by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, alleges that Capital One, which is the 9th largest bank in the United States, introduced a savings account that they titled 360 Performance Savings in 2019. Now, notice that it has a very similar name to a different savings account that they were already offering with a much lower interest rate, okay? And that was called 360 Savings. So the higher interest rate one is called 360 Performance Savings, low interest one, 360 Savings, okay? Now, when the Federal Reserve began raising interest rates, Capital One, along with many other banks, also raised the interest rates that they were offering for high yield savings accounts as well, but they were exclusively doing so for the 360 performance savings accounts, not for the 360 savings accounts. Now, the 360 performance savings accounts today pay a rate of 3.8%. The older accounts pay 0.5%, according to a Capital One spokesperson. Now, here is where this scheme gets incredibly nefarious. As the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau explains it, Capital One eliminated nearly all references to the 360 savings account product on its website and replace them with references to the essentially identical 360 performance savings account without notice that the 360 savings continue to exist as a distinct product. So if you're a Capital One customer and you already had a 360 savings account that has a much lower interest rate, you wouldn't necessarily realize that the 360 performance savings is a completely different savings account with a much higher interest rate. You're gonna think, oh, I'm already signed up for that savings account, similar name. It gets even more interesting though, because it excluded, meaning the bank excluded 360 savings account holders from a marketing campaign advertising the higher interest yield 360 performance savings to Capital One's other existing customers. And it forbade its employees from proactively telling 360 savings account holders about the, again, higher interest rate 360 performance savings. So to be very clear, banks can generally provide as much interest as they want, right? So Chase Bank, notoriously terrible when it comes to offering a high yield savings account offer. Usually the interest rate is super, super low, regardless of what the Federal Reserve does. Even if the Federal Reserve implements incredibly high interest rates, you'll still get offered like a 0.003%, savings account from Chase. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but really only a little bit. But where Capital One went wrong, according to this lawsuit, is intentionally confusing their own customers with the extremely similar account names and withholding information about the better savings account from their existing customers who had the account with the lower savings offer, okay? So per the CFPB, the only thing that has ever meaningfully distinguished 360 performance savings from 360 savings is the former product's higher interest rate. So Capital One, of course, is disputing the findings of this lawsuit, claiming that they did absolutely widely market the 360 performance savings accounts. So this is gonna go through the courts. We'll see what happens. But I do wanna just talk about what's been going on with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in the waning days of the Biden administration. Because remember, Trump is coming in, and Trump was not friendly to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in his first term. He appointed Mick Mulvaney, who despised the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, to be the head of that government agency, and he was bought off by the payday lenders, who of course are loan sharks. And so the CFPB, prior to Mick Mulvaney, had implemented new rules pertaining to payday lenders or same day lenders. And Mick Mulvaney came in and dismantled all that. So there is good reason for the current members of the CFPB to be concerned that once Trump comes in, he could do some real damage to the agency. So they're currently working overtime, like 24/7, trying to accomplish, some of the protections, file some of the lawsuits that really do serve the people of this country who have been defrauded, who have been scammed by various financial institutions. And so, per the New York Times, the CFPB has taken action against a major financial institution almost every working day for the past month. So look, we're gonna have to wait and see what happens when Trump comes in. What we do know is that many Republicans are chomping at the bit to get rid of the agency, not because of any real substantive reason, but because their donors, which are financial institutions, don't like that there's a cop on the beat. They don't like that there's a government agency specifically focusing on banks that are defrauding and scamming American citizens. This is also not a good sign, okay? So obviously Elon Musk has the ear of the incoming president, and he has previously tweeted the following: delete the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. There are too many duplicative regulatory agencies. I totally disagree. The CFPB is really the only government agency that has been going after these big financial institutions that are essentially scamming Americans. So he's wrong about that. The other thing that the CFPB recently did is they're pushing for stricter rules in order to prevent people from being debanked. And so while you'll hear Silicon Valley billionaires like Mark Andreessen tell, Joe Rogan that the CFPB is aiding and abetting or even facilitating debanking, that is not the case at all. The CFPB is actually fighting tooth and nail to prevent people from getting debanked when they've done nothing wrong. Usually the people who are worried about debanking are people who have engaged in potential criminality, but we'll move on from that. And look, after the CFPB finalized a rule to cap overdraft fees, which we should all be celebrating, why should anyone fall prey to these ridiculous overdraft fees? Doge leader Vivek Ramaswamy wrote that in its 15-year history, the CFPB has consistently adopted policies that have harmed the very consumers they seek to protect. This latest gambit of the CFPB is just a symptom of a deeper and unconstitutional cancer of unelected bureaucrats substituting their policy judgments for those of Congress. That's un-American and needs to end. Well, Vivek, as we know, the swamp is real thick, and the swamp mainly exists among our congressional lawmakers. And so the idea that Congress is going to enact legislation to protect Americans from getting scammed by the very individuals and institutions that fund their campaigns is laughable. They haven't, and they're not going to, which is why it was so important to institute a specific government agency following the 2008 economic collapse that specifically looks out for the best interests of the people. Because remember, what led to the 2008 economic collapse were these predatory mortgages, these adjustable rate mortgages that were doled out like candy to various people who couldn't afford them, to be quite frank. And they couldn't afford them because once the interest rates spiked, they were unable to pay their mortgage. So many Americans had their homes foreclosed on as a result of the banks doing this, but that was only half of the scheme. Remember, the banks then bundled up those toxic mortgages as securities and traded them on the stock market. And when they did that, all these Americans unwittingly had invested in those toxic securities. When the economy collapsed, all those people lost half their stock portfolios. I'm talking about hardworking Americans who had slowly but surely saved for retirement. They lost nearly half or more in some cases of their nest egg. And guess what? The banks who doled out those toxic mortgages, they bet against those securities and made more money. Okay, that was the type of disgusting fraud, abuse, that the scam that hurt so many Americans, which is why Senator Elizabeth Warren pushed for the implementation of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And they have returned so much money to Americans who have been defrauded by these financial institutions. And so don't listen to anyone who tells you that the CFPB isn't looking out for you, because at this moment, with the exception of the FTC under Lena Khan's leadership, is really one of the only government agencies looking out for the ordinary American. And so we really need to protect this agency because I've seen them do really good work. But we'll see what happens under Trump. Really, his first term and how he handled the CFPB doesn't give me a lot of hope, but I'm hoping that he proves me wrong. Again, we're gonna have to wait and see.
Thanks for watching. If you become a member, you get to watch all this ad-free, except for, of course, this ad. Still, hit the join button below.